Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate podcast.
Welcome to the Finovate podcast. This is Greg Palmer, and joining me today we have Jacob Jegher, the president of Javelin. It is scary times out there, so I'm doing what I always like to do in times where things are a little bit rocky and look to an expert for some information. Jacob, thank you for being the expert, and thank you for joining me on the podcast.
It's my pleasure, Greg. Thanks for having me.
So there's some news out of Javelin to start with. I think we should cover that first. Obviously, things are a little bit changing for you, even outside of what's going on elsewhere in the world. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yes, definitely much more positive news on the Javelin front. So at the end of December, Javelin Strategy and Research was acquired by a company called Escalent. So we are very, very excited about that. Lots of new opportunities for our firm in the financial services, research and consulting space. So lots to do, exciting times.
Yeah, well, congratulations on that. I think that was great timing, obviously, and it's a really exciting step for you guys. And I know that you've been working really hard producing high quality research for some time, and we've seen that on the Finovate stage over the years. You're a frequent contributor, frequent guest as our analyst panels and things that we do on site. So really, congratulations and well done to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So now we take a turn. Now we're going to, that's all the good news you're going to hear on this whole episode. So it's clear right now there are two kind of major complicating factors going on right now. There's the recession. I think, whether we're technically in one or not, it's clearly coming. And at the same time, there's a coronavirus outbreak, which is forcing people outside of their daily habits. This has a huge amount of people worried in a variety of industries. It's not immediately clear, though, what this means for fintech. And there are some potential positives that could come from this. There are some potential changes that are going to be coming. So I'd like to start by just kind of getting your thoughts on what you're seeing. What changes can we expect to the world of fintech specifically with everything that's going on?
I think that's a great question, Greg. And there are going to be a lot of changes forthcoming. Clearly, I don't think you need an expert in order to come to that conclusion. But I do think it's important to discuss some of the finer points around it, specifically around, what's going to change, how are things going to evolve. And frankly do we really have a bubble that we had before? And if so, the bubble that folks were talking about in fintech pre-coronavirus, are we seeing now the fallout of that bubble or the eventual fallout of it? Or are we looking at something much larger? So, around that.
I guess it's a question, is there some underlying inefficiency or imbalance somewhere in the market, or is it completely a shock to the system? Because there have been people talking about a bubble in fintech and sort of predicting something like this. Not this exactly, but
yep.
I think that's really one of those big questions.
Correct. So we did have a bubble in fintech, and there's no question that, in my mind, that's a part of it. It's not the catalyst, though, right? As we saw. So
Sure.
Having some underlying fundamentals of that bubble contribute to some of the uncertainties certainly presents the challenges that we're in today. But needless to say, there are going to be, particularly for some of the smaller firms, small businesses, the startups in the space, it's going to be some challenging times ahead.
Right. Well, I think that's certainly one very valid view. I think the other piece that I kind of keep coming back to, obviously, Finovate was started in the wake of the last Great Recession, 2007, 2008. And so there was a big crunch. There was a lot of capital that dried up. But at the same time, there was this kind of creativity that we saw in people who were trying things that they hadn't necessarily felt a need to try before, looking at efficient or inefficiencies that maybe they didn't need to address before. So I think there is potentially room for creativity despite the kind of obvious and glaring problems that we'll see.
110%. And we spend a lot of our time advising our clients on where some of that creativity can be found. And there's going to be a ton of it, and it's going to sit in a few different areas, right? So spaces like digital, right? We've seen all kinds of all kinds of opportunities pop up in the digital space over the last few years, each one more exciting than the next, frankly. And now, with folks confined to their homes for an uncertain period of time at this stage, it does change some of what's out there today, it changes some of the urgency around digital. And we could easily see increased spending in certain areas, investment in others, as behavior change is forced into the market rather than made a choice.
Right. And I think it's certainly a stress test also for banks that have done a lot of work getting their digital pieces ready to go. Now, just like we're seeing in a lot of other areas, there's going to be increased demand, increased users coming through those systems who are sort of forced into using it. It's going to be really interesting to see whose systems can sustain that type of pressure and where we start to see some cracks appearing. I mean, the idea, of course, is that there shouldn't be any cracks anywhere. We've had plenty of time to get things set up. Of course, the reality is not always what should be happening, but
Right.
I think this is something that's going to be just fascinating to watch.
100%. So I mean, we've seen crack, and there's going to be digital cracks too, and so sometimes they're big ones, like what we saw with Robinhood in the last over the last couple of weeks with the various trading halts in the market, right? And that's more specific to markets and trading
Sure, yeah.
and wealth management. However, there are other opportunities around just how to enable clients to do things with digital, or to finally take advantage of the mobile banking tool that's been in front of them for years that they are now going to be forced to use. But hopefully, it'll provide a pleasant experience in which they will want to come back rather than say, I can't wait for that branch to reopen.
Right, right, yeah. We'll be driving people back to the branch if we're not careful, or
Right.
maybe
It's
that's
a
what some banks actually want to do, I suppose.
Well, I don't know. I think
Well,
it's
yeah,
actually going to be. I think it's going to be a really interesting test, and it's going to be a user experience test. Frankly, in other words, if a mobile banking app has ever been put to the test, this is it right here. If folks who haven't used it before are now trying it and love it, you've done a great job. But if they're saying, "Oh God, get me back to the branch," and sometimes that will happen simply because it's new and it's different, so we have to, separate that from the equation. But if the output of the test is I love it and I'm going to keep using this and I no longer need to go to the branch to deposit my checks or what have you, then off we go. I was thinking also the other day about, as I had to go to the ATM to withdraw some cash, being able to stage that transaction on my phone and just, scanning the QR code and letting the cash pop out versus actually physically touching the ATM machines. There have been innovations that have popped out in the space over time that actually are helping us today in coronavirus. So, for me, that was a bit of a silver lining saying, oh, I'm thankful for this technology that's out there today.
absolutely. I completely agree with that because it's something that I think we've sort of as an industry been preparing for something like this. Not specifically, but we should be ready to some extent. We've got a lot of technology that should enable people to bank remotely, to engage very minimally with branches, and to be able to do a lot of things from home. I suppose that this is one of those things we were talking about before we actually push record here. This idea that it takes something drastic sometimes to change consumer behavior, to kind of break people out of the habits that they have. And sometimes you find once you're broken out of those habits that you actually can find a better way of doing things. So, I think we talked a little bit about the opportunities that come from this, and I think that's probably one of the biggest ones. And somebody, whoever can take advantage of that, shift in customer expectations, this shift in customer habits, will be well positioned to come out of this in a good place.
Absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree. There's going to be a lot of new things that come out of this. And hopefully people look to their financial service provider and say, that's great in the
Yeah.
wake of this crisis. And I think it'll also spur some, unfortunately, we are going to see some, unemployment related issues with this. And we spent Javelin quite a fair bit of time. We've done quite a bit of research and a few reports on neobanks and the gig economy, specifically for small businesses. So we're going to see a lot more gig economy work pop up in the market. There's never been a better time for a financial institution and the fintech space to start supporting that segment of the population.
For sure. No, I think that's a really smart move. And I think it's one that, again, a lot of banks have been able to sort of get away with not paying a huge amount of attention to it because there hasn't been this kind of stress. But now that we see that, it looks increasingly important. So, this is a good transition point because there are definitely some opportunities that are going to come from this, but it's certainly naive to think it's all a rosy picture. There's quite a bit of pain points as well. Some things, the pitfalls that are popping up that didn't used to be there. What do you see as things that fintechs and banks really need to be wary of in these changing times?
There's so many different pieces that they've got to watch out for in changing times. So pitfalls today are going to be very much around, how do you manage your budget, right? And your cash flow associated with investment. What are you going to decide to keep pushing the envelope on? What's going to get cut back on? And right, it's just a realistic point of view, given what's likely to take place with budgets, whether they're fintechs or financial institutions. So being able to be smart with your money, invest it wisely, and come out with what going to matter most to clients is going to be a challenge. I don't know if it will necessarily, I'm hoping it won't be a pitfall,
Sure.
but certainly could be for some if not done well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're spot on there. I think the other one that I see is there's a real danger, I think, of a lot of financial institutions in particular scaling back their investment on digital solutions, on fintech firms, and sort of saying, okay, we're going to really conserve cash. We're going to just be, we're going to ride this out. We're not going to do anything right now. We're going to wait and see how things shake out and get some more information. It's really easy to understand that motivation. But at the same time, I think it's never been more important that you continue to invest in digital solutions and potentially even increase the amount that you're investing in those solutions because, as we were talking about earlier, they've never been more important.
Yeah, I think it will just change what's invested in, but not necessarily the investment. In other words, some of the levels might drop for sure, but overall, the investment in digital and tools is going to continue. But I'll give you an example, one that just came to my mind here, right? So if we're talking about innovation in the future, I mean, there's so many different angles we can take. So I'll ask a question to the audience here, for folks to ponder in their own minds, which is, will this take us a step or two back in innovation in some areas? In other words, we've heard a lot on topics like open banking, right? Are we now a step or two back in open banking because it's, already was a questionable priority in the United States for many, not as much in Canada. We see a lot more of it happening in Canada, or at least the start of it. But does that now take a step or two back? Question mark, right? TBD.
Right.
Let's see.
Yeah.
I've got some thoughts on it, and maybe we could talk about that another time. But that's an example, and others will probably see ramp up that we never thought of before. I mean, my kids are home from school this week, and as are many, and they go to a private school, and they've been given all types of e-learning courses, and they log on each day on their device and have a whole lesson plan, and they meet their teacher and their fellow classmates. And it's fascinating to me to see some of the shift as to how the school has invested in some of the technology and now changed their learning platform and model. But ultimately, they're still teaching. Right, they're still teaching the kids, just using different tools.
Right. Well, and it comes back to getting people outside that comfort zone. And that bell did mean we're out of time there, but I think it's worth just kind of tying the bow on this because it is something where you would never have kind of gone for that if there hadn't been an outside circumstance that pushed you towards it. The school would not have undertaken that. And now that you're in this position where you've been forced to do that, you actually realize that it's a system that's workable. And I'm sure it's not 100% workable yet. I mean, it's been 2 days since you've started it. Right. So a little too soon to call it a success, but it's a good illustration of that core concept that the things can shift customer behavior, and it takes something like this sometimes to do that. And so there's an opportunity here to mold a version of the future into what we want it to be, and to at least get something positive out of the pain, because the pain is clearly coming, and there's going to be any number of people who are affected by this in an extremely negative way, and we're just beginning to really feel that. So I think it's worthwhile to spend some time thinking what positives can we pull from it as well.
Exactly. And those positives are huge, right? I'm looking at what my kids are doing and I'm saying, this has huge implications for technology. It has huge implications for financial services from a behavior change perspective, from a how we use technology perspective. And I think it's a bit of a silver lining we have over here in this whole crisis, really saying, okay, we're going to have some interesting innovations come a few months from now.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. So I think we'll leave it there. Jacob, if anybody wants to learn more of your thoughts on this, is there a way that they can gather information or reports that you're putting out?
Absolutely. We are writing a ton of research and speaking to our clients all the time and working on various consulting projects. You can find us at javelinstrategy.com. You can email me directly. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and other mediums.
Perfect. Well, if anybody has any questions or wants to follow up, I would highly recommend engaging with the fine work that Jacob and his team are putting out there. So again, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast, and good luck in the months ahead.
Thank you. Very same to you. Thanks for having me.
The Finovate podcast is produced by Informa Connect in association with Provoke.fm Media. Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.